Hey everybody, welcome back to Freestyle Friday. So this is the vise that we're going to build in this video, or at least we're building the head of the vise, the part that provides the clamping action. Now I have some really nice hardwoods left over from furniture projects I've done off of YouTube. I've got some figured cherry, some curly cherry, I've got some figured figured maple. And I have some exotics that I'd like to use in this project as well. Some canary wood and some purple heart. Now the canary and purple heart is only a 1/4 inch thick, and I need some 1 inch thick stock. So I took those pieces and laminated them together. Just did a layer of purple, a layer of canary, a layer of purple, a layer of canary. And of course, when you're doing laminations like this, you got to use a lot of clamps. I'm pretty sure I used every clamp I had in the shop for the glue-ups on this. So after the glue-ups were done, threw the clamps back in the drawer, and I did the little SketchUp model. It's not an exact model, but it needed to get some templates made for the handles and some of the parts that were, the way they needed to be. And I used Izzy Swan's big print program. I just took a screen capture of the 3D model and then made them the size I needed in Matthias's program. And then I just glued them down to the blanks that I'd glued up. And I used glue stick, and it works, but it can be a little bit of a pain to get them off. Now on these contours, there's some of them that have really sharp turns. So rather than trying to cut those turns with the bandsaw, I just used a Forstner bit that had the same radius as those sharp turns and drilled those holes out, and then went over to the bandsaw and finished cutting the profiles. If you're ever doing sharp turns with the bandsaw, sometimes if you can just cut with a drill bit, it's a lot nicer of a turn, and the cut is much more accurate than trying to do it with the bandsaw. So after I cut everything out with the bandsaw, I went over to the big sander and edged anything. Now anything I couldn't reach with the big sander, I used my little drill-powered homemade spindle sander. And the last bit to do on these parts that I used templates on was to cut out the holes positions. So after I cut out the hole positions on all the parts that had templates, I went and scraped off the templates. And then these are a little bit tricky to get off, but a little scraping and sanding, and it's not too bad, I guess. So some of the hole positions needed 3/8 threads tapped in them, and I'm tapping right into the wood. So I just used my 3/8 tap for that, metal tap for that. And the last thing I needed to do with these little parts here were to attach the handle to that little disc shape thing. But to do that, I had to add the linkage to find the right position for the handle. And once I did, I just glued the handle and the disc together, and then when the glue dried, I put a couple of plugs in to keep it in that position, because there will be some pressure on it. And then with those parts done, I went ahead and put a couple cuts of Danish oil on them. I wanted to get a little head start on the finish while I was working on the other parts of this particular part of the build. So these are the stanchions that are going to go on either side of the head of the vise. Now I needed to translate some lines from one side to the other, and I made this Straddle Square. It's a PLA infused with carbon fiber, and I 3D printed it. And I tell you what, that's been like super handy to have in the shop, because I can get those lines from one side to the other side of the project with absolutely dead-on precision, which is really nice. So after I laid out one, I just translated those marks to the second one, and then again laid it out. And whenever I'm doing layouts like this, I always like to cut or put a mark on all the waste material, so I don't forget, because I'm old. I mean, I could forget that where I'm supposed to be cutting. So I cut out these pieces on the table saw, the parts that needed to come out. Now I didn't want to install in my dado stack, so I just ran it over the blade a few times to cut away the waste material. And I was real careful on either side to make sure it would fit the pieces that needed to go into them. So this whole thing is going to work off of a wedge type of system. It'll make more sense as we get further along in the build. So I needed to cut that wedge shape off of the piece that was left on the stanchion, and I did that with a handsaw. And then just cleaned it up with my 1-inch belt sander. And then off camera, I glued in those 2 long pieces to each of the stanchions. Now later I'm actually going to cut those off, but for the moment I want them on, so I have this nice long flat platform for drilling holes, if that makes any sense. When I was drilling the holes for these bushings on the drill press, it's nice to have that real long flat surface to keep everything nice and flat. But anyway, I drilled out these holes on the drill press, for these bushings. And now these bushings are going to accept some 3/8 bolts that are actually going to slide back and forth. And I could have just used it on wood, but I like the idea of having the bushings in there so I don't have the metal rubbing on the wood. Now after those were in place, I marked out some holes on the faceplate. This is actually going to be the faceplate of the clamp. And those holes that I'm threading right now will have 3/8 bolts threaded into them. And that faceplate will move back and forth on those 3/8 bolts. So that's pretty much the faceplate stuff, or the head of the clamp, done. I'm just going to add some more Danish oil to all the parts and give them a wipe down. With Danish oil, you like to give them, really saturate them, let them sit for about 30 minutes, and then wipe the excess off. And I'll put several more coats on before this project is done. So off camera, I cut the stanchions off those pieces of teak that you see there. And now I'm just adding some bolts. Those are the bolts that the faceplate will slide back and forth on. And then I screwed that teak H center member right to the faceplate, and then added the handle and the wedges, and set it up so I could test it out. So what happens when you pull on the handle, those two links push a wedge on each side, and those two wedges push against that wedge we cut on the inside of the stanchion, and that pushes that whole faceplate forward, and that's where clamping pressure is going to come from. Now in the next build, we'll build the part that slides in and out of the bench and locks in place. But I'm going to cut it short here instead of completing the build, the whole vise in this video, because this video is already getting pretty long. But I really like the way the Canary and the Purple Heart contrast each other. It really gives that vise a nice center focus, and I'm really happy with the build so far. I'm pretty confident that this is going to work out really well. So I had a little trouble with the bolts. I got my holes just a little tiny bit offline, but after using it a little bit, they started to work their way like free, I guess. So they weren't pitching as bad. And I haven't waxed anything, and I haven't. This is definitely not done yet. But I'll wax everything and get everything all kind of tuned in when the vise is finished, and I'm sure that all that will go away. Well, that about wraps it up for this video. In the next video, we'll finish this vise build, and I'm not sure I'm going to wait until next Friday to post it. I may post it as a random video throughout the week. And don't forget, guys, we're doing videos Monday, Wednesday, and Friday now. Money Saving Mondays, tool tips, and talk on Wednesdays. And then, of course, Freestyle Fridays. Talk to y'all soon.